is chapter 5. We're going to move on. This is at the point where we've all left off. So hopefully you've watched the previous videos and you were all caught up. So we're starting with chapter 5 today. It's called Setting. And we just left off learning about Joey Gilbert. He was our villain, or the person that does not do nice things in this book. We know that he earned that title because of what he did to Lara on the playground. Let's find out about the setting. I know good and well that if Mrs. Smith is reading this, she's probably real disappointed about me not having a setting to speak of and that we're already at chapter 5. But I don't think it's all my fault. I mean, school classrooms are about the most boring places you can write about. What would I say so I could have some setting for the story? 4 walls, 2 with blackboards on them, only they're really whiteboards, and instead of chalk, big markers sit on the little silver ledges. Big, interesting set. All classrooms look alike. That's how come you can get so mixed up when you're a really little kid and you keep getting into the wrong classroom because they all look the same. Or I could say that the floor is blondish, skinny boards, and the chairs and desk arms are all brown. And now that would be the first time I could describe how our room looked a little different from the other rooms in Paris Elementary because Mrs. Smith went and had gotten a special-made desk for Laura. That 22nd desk was really a big teacher's chair and a folding table that fit in front of it. So that's a little interesting, but there's not much more setting at school, if you ask me. And not too much more happened the rest of Laura Phelps' first day either, because by the time we got back from afternoon recess, there wasn't enough school left for anything else interesting to happen. When school got let out, I watched Laura waddle to an old blue minivan. She climbed up into the back of the van, even though that couldn't have been an easy thing to do. And there wasn't another person in that van except for a regular-sized man driving. And it turned out that he was her daddy, and he picked her up every single day after school. I bounced out of there fast after that and headed home. I walked because I hated the school bus. There's a lot of setting on that bus, but none of it's good. It takes me 20 minutes to walk home, but it's better than 2 minutes on the bus with the likes of Joey Gilbert and 3 fifth-grade boys who think that they own the bus. The sun was still full-strength hot, with not so much as a cloud hanging in the sky. Some of the leaves on top of maple trees had started to burn brown. After I turned off School Street, which is the real live name for it, I lost the sidewalk and took to the left side of the gravel road leading out of town. Nearly every step stirred up grasshoppers. That's how dry it had been all summer. Locusts buzzed in the bushes as I walked past that Methodist church. Some people call it singing, what those crickets do. And I suppose that it would make for a prettier piece of setting, all right, but it still sounds just like a buzzing to me. A few kids walked as far as Orange Street ahead of me, but I was the only one that kept going past the old railroad tracks, on beyond the cemetery and around the fork to our place. There's a lot of setting at my house. My house is a peeling white box made of boards with 2 windows in front. The funny thing is that the windows are different sizes. One's tall and thin, a rectangle. The other is short and fat, a square. So, when you look at our house, straight on, it seems like the house is winking at you. There's a front porch that needs a rail and maybe 2 steps. But we don't go in the front anyway. 2 rusted out cars propped up on old gray blocks sprawl out over the weedy lawn. There's a lilac bush out back that grew all by itself but didn't have any flowers on it. Nobody was home when I walked in through the back door, which wasn't locked, like it never is. Daddy says anybody fool enough to steal from a Grafton ought to have his head examined. My brothers are only in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, but they've already got themselves a reputation. So does my daddy. He works at the parts factory and has won more than his share of fights. Sometimes I hear about them at school. I'd never seen the inside of the parts factory, but I'd bet my middle big brother's eyes that there's a whole lot of setting in there, too. I opened the fridge because I was real hungry, but I already knew everything that was in there because I do all the grocery shopping. Chocolate pudding in plastic cups, an open can of spaghetti, apples, some of them were mushy, hot dogs and bologna were in the meat drawer. I shut the fridge and got peanut butter out of the jelly cupboard and ate a couple spoonfuls of that instead. There were 2 little boxes of macaroni and cheese mix, which I thought about making for supper. That's one thing I don't have to do, is cook for everybody. Daddy says we're all big enough to fend for ourselves, and that's what we do. I don't see any reason why I should cook for my brothers just because I'm the girl. And I'm not making their beds either. They can just go and get themselves a maid if that's what they want. That's what I tell them. When I told Matt this, he threw his pillow at me and hit me in the head with it, but it didn't hurt. Then he threw his boot at me, but I ducked and missed, and it would have hurt if it hit. But tonight, I wanted to cook up the macaroni for Daddy and me because I had to ask him something that I thought he might be more likely to say yes to if he had a nice hot plate of macaroni and cheese in front of him. The thing I had to ask him was about Mrs. Smith's play I wanted to try out to be in it. Joey Gilbert says plays are stupid. I never let on in school, but I love those plays. I even checked out a written down play by that Shakespeare guy. I had to take it back to the library the next day because the English they talked back then, it wasn't easy to understand like our English. But the stuff I could understand was really good, and some of it even rhymed, which is not easy to do in case you've ever tried it. I might be an actress when I get out of school. I know this sounds like something a little kid would say, then all the grown-ups would say back, oh, how cute, or isn't that sweet? Except for if I said this to my daddy, he would probably say I should stop being a dumbhead and that people like us don't make a living like that. This is why I knew I needed the macaroni. Mrs. Smith's play was called Fair Day, and there were lots of girl parts. Some of the characters in that play came and visited the fair, and the other characters have animals that they show at the fair. Mrs. Smith said we couldn't have real animals, but it'd still be really a good play. Joey Gilbert said Fair Day sounded like the dumbest thing that he'd ever heard. This would be my first official play, but I acted all the time. Like when Daddy asked me, how's school? I'd say, fine, and he'd believe me. And when Mrs. Smith or somebody asked me, how are things at home? And I'd just say, they're fine. They'd believe me too. So I figured I was a pretty good actress, and I always had been. I pulled out the macaroni box and hid it behind the cereal in the cupboard over the sink. The door slammed. I recognized the footsteps as my littlest big brother, Luke. Hey, I'm starving, he screamed from the back porch. He stomped into the kitchen and threw his backpack on the floor. Luke never says hi or how are you like a normal person. What's there to eat? Pepperoni pizza, bacon cheeseburgers, chocolate milkshakes, and homemade brownies, I answered. Shut up, Lainey, he said. I almost forgot to say that our kitchen has an old stove on one wall. It's white, but it has a chip out of the front, and there's a Band-Aid over that chip. But it's been there for as long as I can remember. Only 2 of the 4 black burners work, but we don't care. Under one small, smudged window in the sink is a sink with a dripping, snake-necked faucet. There's also an orangish-brown refrigerator, which I told you what it had in it, and a wooden table with 4 chairs that didn't match each other. If we ever did want to eat together, we'd have to pull in a chair from the living room. The floor is gray linoleum with red and white specks on it, which comes in handy because when there's food or dirt on it, it pretty much looks like the specks in the linoleum. Whoever had the house before we did painted all the rooms lime green, and we figured they must have gotten that paint on super sale, and no wonder it was on super sale because who wants lime green? But we got used to it. Luke grabbed 2 puddings from the fridge and took them to the silverware drawer for a spoon. Then the next person who stormed in hungry was Robert. Robert's in high school, 9th grade, and he doesn't look much like Luke or Matt. People say Robert got the good looks in the family. He's tall and he has blonde hair instead of the brown like the rest of us. But he's got Daddy's squinty, hard eyes. I don't know who I look like, but I hope I got some of my mama in me. It's hard to tell with only the one picture of her, and that's hid under those magazines in a drawer. But she's not dead, just run away. So someday I'll see her, and I can tell if we look alike or not. Robert went straight to the jelly cupboard instead of the fridge. He also got the brains in the family. I was glad I'd seen the macaroni and hidden it already. Didn't you get anything good to eat, Lainey? He growled. Luke spoke up before I could. Pepperoni pizza, bacon cheeseburgers, brownies. Robert smacked him in the back of the head. Shut up, Luke, you're not funny. I kept my mouth shut and went to the living room. I about had a cow when I saw Matt on the couch. The couch is almost the same green as the paint on the walls, and this is a coincidence. Matt was stretched out on the couch, his dirty legs and bare feet hanging over one arm. There were bowls and newspapers and wrappers on the carpet. Our rug is called Shag, and that's a good name for it because it looks like it belongs on the back of a brown shaggy dog. It smells kind of like a dog, too. I never sit on the floor in the living room. Plus, if I do, my legs get itchy. From the look of things, Matt had been home a long time. I guess I was standing in front of the TV because he shouted, "Get out of the way, zithead!" He pointed the remote at me, and the TV turned on. And I made sure I got out of the way. I figured Matt hadn't bothered to go to school at all, but I wasn't about to say so. Like I said, Matt is the meanest of my big brothers. Robert came in. "What are you doing home, Matt? Did you ditch again?" "You're not my mother," Matt said. He pointed the remote again, and the volume went up so loud he probably couldn't hear what Robert had said next. Which is a good thing, because if I wrote it in this book, the book would get burned. The last place for setting was my room, which is where I went so I didn't have to listen to Matt and Robert yelling at each other. Upstairs should be an attic, but we split it into 2 rooms with a blanket down the middle. Daddy has one room and I have the other. The roof slants, so there are places you can't stand up without bumping your head, especially Daddy because he's 6 feet tall. The walls are green like downstairs. Mrs. Smith says that a setting like a character's room should tell you about the character. I don't see how mine tells much about me, but here goes. My bed is a mattress on the floor against one wall with a little window above it. 3 things are stuck on my walls. Number 1, a shelf made of wood, stained and varnished. My dad made it himself and put it on my wall right where I had said I wanted it. And it's the nicest thing he ever gave me. I kept books on it. Sometimes the library has old books for quarters, and our school librarians give me books that she'd throw away otherwise. I have The Secret Garden, which is so old the covers aren't stuck to the pages anymore, and Because of Winn-Dixie, which is a book we read last year, and all of us got a copy. Some kids didn't even want theirs, so I have 3 of them. I've got a couple of animal books with rabbits as characters or mice. Mrs. Smith makes us write about people instead of animals, and she would be happy to know that there aren't any animals in this book so far. Unless you count the locusts and the crickets and the grasshoppers, but if I do write a story about animals, it will probably be about turkeys, and they won't get killed for Thanksgiving because I think turkeys have a pretty hard life. 2, the second thing on my wall is a tennis shoe. I'm probably the only 4th grader in all of Missouri who has a tennis shoe glued to her lime green wall. But last year I beat Roger Stevie and Joey Gilbert and every other boy in 3rd grade in the race our school had for Fitness Week. And it was official. Our teacher started the race by blowing his whistle and everybody watched. So when my shoes got too small, which they almost were before the race even, and my toes stuck through, then I glued one shoe to my wall so that I would never forget what it felt like to have people cheering for me. And 3, the 3rd thing on my wall is a poster Miss Gibson, our school librarian, gave me when she fixed up her library with all new stuff. The poster is a picture of a theater, not the movie theater kind, the Globe Theater. It's where Shakespeare acted out his fancy plays. I really like that poster a lot. And looking at it reminded me about the play I wanted to be in and how I would have to get my daddy's permission to even try out, because if I did win the part, I'd have to stay after school and practice. And getting my daddy to say okay to that one was going to take a lot more than macaroni and cheese.